Gift Responsibly, Protecting Youth and Promoting Safe Gambling Practices. In this episode, we dive into the Gift Responsibly Campaign, an initiative dedicated to educating communities about the risks of gifting lottery tickets to children and raising awareness about youth gambling. We explore the harm of early exposure to gambling, the psychology behind gifting gambling-related items, and provide alternative gift ideas for loved ones. Join us as we share resources for responsible gambling, discuss eye-opening statistics on youth gambling, and reaffirm our podcast commitment to the campaign. Let's protect our youth and foster a culture of informed, responsible choices.
This is Talking Addiction and Recovery, the podcast talking, you guessed it, all about addiction and recovery. Join your host, licensed professional counselor Andrew J. Schreier, as he and his guests break down recovery topics with raw honesty, delving into niche conversations around the topics of substance abuse, mental health, and gambling. We intend to meet individuals where they are on their own personal journey of recovery, with dignity, respect, and compassion. We'll do more than talk addiction and recovery. We'll explore it. We're glad you've joined us. Here with today's episode, your host, Andrew Schreier.
Welcome to Talking Addiction and Recovery podcast. Today's episode fits in right around the holiday season with the gift giving and purchasing of items for people around the holidays and celebrations. And this episode is really going to dive into really what is the Gift Responsibly campaign in relation to gambling related gifts and in particular gifting these to youth. So we're going to talk a lot about what the campaign is and look at some alternatives to gift giving and items, but also like why do people think to give lottery tickets or gambling related items to children? And part of it is to, reaffirm the statement of a commitment that the podcast made where Talking Addiction Recovery supports the campaign by educating listeners and promoting responsible gambling practices. And it's important because we want to prevent youth from early exposure to gambling. And as you will listen to some of the statistics and research behind it, we'll see why that is important. So you might be wondering, what is the Gift Responsibly campaign? And a little bit of a background is it's organized by the National Council on Problem Gambling in collaboration with international lotteries and responsible gambling organizations. And the main goal is to educate, about the risks of gifting lottery tickets to minors and promote responsible gambling for adults. And with that has a key message of lottery tickets and gambling products are not appropriate gifts for children or anyone under the legal age of gambling. And you can learn more. We'll have the links for the Gift Responsibly campaign in the podcast notes, and you can visit www.ncpgambling.org and you can find out their responsible gambling campaign. And there's a lot of resources, toolkits, and everything that you need to know about it. And you can also still commit to it. And that's part of what we did when we made our official statement to be a part of the campaign. So before we get into some of the youth statistics, the question might be is why do people gift lottery tickets to youth? Out of all the gifts out there, the ideas out there, the possibilities, what you might find, in aisles of children or youth gifts, or you're searching online somewhere and you look up what it might be or what you can make. The question is, why give lottery tickets or gambling related items to youth, knowing that they are underage? We would definitely question that if someone decided to give, a big bottle of alcohol to a kid. That would definitely raise a lot of eyebrows or cause up a stir. But, sometimes when it comes to giving kids or youth gambling related products or even lottery tickets, actual gambling, doesn't raise as much concern or eyebrows. It's seen as not as big of a deal. So I thought that'd be important to look at why would we think to gift lottery tickets to youth in the first place. So a couple of things that have come up. And one is that there is a perception that this is harmless fun. So many adults would view lottery tickets as like a low stake entertainment. It may not associate them with like the potential risks of gambling, so it's not seen as if I give this kid a $5 lottery ticket that I purchased, that it is the same as when we're talking about an adult who is spending, exponential amount of money on gambling and the impact that it can have. It's seen as a novelty gift or a way to share in the excitement of potentially winning money. And this perception can minimize the understanding of how early exposure to gambling can impact youth in life. It's one of the topics I presented on at conferences and webinars on the myths or misunderstandings of youth gambling, that people think that youth can have an issue with gambling. It's interesting to think that the idea of if you expose them earlier to it, or if you give them or gift them things related to gambling, you are making that more of a risk than you would think if you were just not doing that at all. So one is perception of harmless fun, that this is not harmful and it's just not the same as when we talk about adults. Another thing is too the holiday and celebration tradition. Lottery tickets are commonly used as stocking stuffers during holidays or as inexpensive gifts for special occasions, like birthdays and graduations. I went to a wedding where the gift for everyone was a $1 scratch off. And, these traditions can normalize gambling behaviors, especially when children see them as part of a family ritual. So it is a big part of like gift giving, not just around the holidays, but it can be for other things like birthdays, celebrations, weddings, that this is seen as a pretty traditional thing in our culture. Number 3 is, a lack of awareness about risks. Many people who are going to gift these, to youth or children are unaware of the potential risks associated with early gambling exposure, such as developing problem gambling behaviors. They might not understand that even small, seemingly harmless forms of gambling can affect decision-making and impulse control and developing brain. So we talk about that a lot with, substance use and other things. And we often forget that can happen with something, we talk about that more with, social media with youth and children and technology in general. I hear it talked about a lot with video games as well, but it's interesting how gambling sort of becomes that continuous, ignored area of concern, even though we see the impact of, gift giving with youth and underage. We see the impact that increased access to gambling and what's happening with sports betting is one of those things that is going to affect adolescents and youth as they are still, learning and their brains are developing. So that lack of awareness about the risks is another reason why it seems like it's not as big of a deal. Number 4, accessibility and cost. Lottery tickets and gambling related items are inexpensive. They're pretty widely available, and easy to purchase. Their accessibility makes them an appealing option for gift giving. Can't really deny that, especially when the giver might be looking for something that is last minute, low cost. It might be something that is inexpensive to purchase that might come with like a higher reward. And you always have to be careful, because I always tell people when it comes to gambling that, we talk about the money, we talk about the cost, but it's always different for that person. So what may seem like a little bit amount of money to you, that amount could still have an impact on somebody. And just because the person didn't purchase the gift or the lottery ticket, like in this case, the kid would be the one receiving it. It's not necessarily that $5 you spent or that dollar you spent or that $20 you spent is the concern about the cost. It's more of now this individual is getting more exposed to it and the risks that come with that exposure. And now those costs will not necessarily show up right away, as in like what it was to buy that lottery ticket. But we're talking about the costs that come then when someone has a problem with gambling or they end up being diagnosed with a gambling disorder. So I always say gambling is a topic where you're going to talk about money and you're going to have those discussions. And this is one where there's this direct conversation around accessibility and cost that impacts what seems like it's not as big of an issue to gift gambling or lottery tickets and stuff like that. Number 5, misguided intention to teach financial lessons. So some adults do believe that gifting tickets is a fun way to teach children about money or to discuss probability or financial responsibility. However, the approach can inadvertently encourage risky behaviors rather than responsible financial habits. And I always talk about this when it comes to, it's easy for language like gambling and investing to, intertwine and become, we use the same language that thinks it might mean the same thing. And I always really tell people you've got to be careful when you think of gambling as investing. And if we're talking about investing and we're talking about wanting to be financially responsible, which I don't disagree with, I just mentioned the importance of talking about money. There's a whole talk I do on that we don't have enough conversations around money. And money is a difficult thing to talk about, and it's at the root. Not the root, but it's a part of a lot of issues related to, substance use, mental health, families, relationships. And yeah, it's something that we should be talking to about youth, but that is not the best way to teach financial lessons, or probability is not to engage them in what would be a risky behavior to learn that financial lesson. There's other no risk or low risk ways that you can teach someone financial lessons. Number 6, influence of social norms and advertising. And this is really a bigger one that's come up more in recent years with sports betting is, the normalization of gambling in media and advertising often portrays it as fun and it's social. This can influence adults to view gambling-related gifts as appropriate, even for younger audiences. Can be used as fun, that it's a good time. There's still some advertising out there about free stuff and low risk, and it's always. I always say there's always some risk involved with gambling, because the definition of itself includes risking something of value. So, but when we see more of the advertisements, you see more of the celebrities, you see more of influencers and people who are getting involved in gambling and betting apps or betting just avenues, is it can create that image that this is normal, this is acceptable, and this is fun, you're gonna have a good time, you can win. So it's hard to think like that is a risk or concerning when it appeals to viewers that this is something to easily do and there's low risk. So with that, we have to be careful more of those types of things, which is why, some of the efforts in gambling have been to, make changes or to have more safeguards around things like advertising and stuff like that. So it's really important to pay attention to some of those things that we know youth are getting exposed to, whether it's in their social media apps, whether it's websites, whether it's TV. I don't know many people now who haven't seen some gambling related advertisement or promotion somewhere. It's pretty much a consistent thing. And number 7, this is an important one that I want to touch on, is bonding and shared experiences. Is that, for some families, gambling activities like scratch offs or raffles or informal bets are seen as opportunities to bond and share experiences. It can be a moment of excitement. You get that dopamine rush, and people may give more attention to someone scratching off a lottery ticket to see what happens, or if they win big, versus if they're just opening up a traditional gift. So this can unintentionally expose you to gambling behaviors in a way that normalizes this participation. So even if adults are doing this around kids and having them be a part of it or involved, it's interesting that when you ask individuals, and I've been doing work with gambling for a number of years now, and whenever you work with someone who has experiencing some problems with it, or they're diagnosed with a gambling disorder, it's often pretty young where they were exposed to it, and it usually is something that they learned from family. It was a experience that, bonding, and you include tradition, include culture, include holidays and other things like that, where this was a part of what we did. This was a part of how we spend time together, and that can be another area of exposure to kids and youth about gambling, and that this is normal. If we're all doing this, at this event or this gathering, it's safe. Why would we do this if it was harmful? So I think after going through those were 7 reasons, going into why people would think giving lottery tickets or gambling related items might not be a concern, and why it's something where people feel comfortable doing it, or it's no big deal, just like giving anything else. So what's the big deal? What is the concern that some of us, in the Gift Responsibly campaign, and when we talk about youth gambling, what are the risks that we are concerned about? So one of the best ways to do that is I'll talk about some statistics related to youth gambling. And research shows that early exposure to gambling can increase the likelihood of developing gambling problems later in life. And, we don't think that as much because we're just not imagining, a youth, a child gambling like an adult would. So when we think of like problem gambling or some of the gambling disorder, we think of an adult with an issue like that. But we also know, when a youth or a child is exposed more to substance use, they're more likely to develop problems with substances later in life as well. And gambling's no different. According to the National Council on Problem Gambling, around 4 to 6% of adolescents meet the criteria for gambling problems, and 10 to 14% are at risk. More than half of young people, which is 62% online and 64% offline, had seen gambling advertisements in 2024. So remember, part of that influence of social norms and advertising is a lot of young people are seeing gambling advertisements. And we know that exposure to gambling ads has been linked to increased gambling participation. So the more someone's exposed to it, they are more likely to engage in that behavior. Around 9% of young gamblers reported arguments or tension with family members due to gambling, while 5% admitted their gambling sometimes interfered with schoolwork or personal study. So it's interesting when there's talk of youth can't have an issue with gambling. There's no issue with it, yet 9% reported arguments or tension with family about the issue, and 5% admitted that their gambling interfered with schoolwork, which once again, it's that idea of, I didn't think gambling would interfere with someone's schoolwork because they're not even of age. The majority, 80% of youth who gamble, cited fun as the primary reason. However, motivations also include peer influence and the thrill of risk-taking. So there's a little bit of thrill and excitement into gambling. So we're already talking about risks, and with risks can come harm, and early exposure to that and repeated exposure to that is what can lead to increased chances of having problems with gambling or being diagnosed with gambling disorder. 58% of 18 to 22-year-olds reported engaging in at least one sports betting activity, with significant participation on college campuses where 67% of students reported betting. So we also know that when we get out of that youth group age, we also have that 18 to 22-year-olds where, young adults, certain things are now becoming legal, but there's definitely an increased amount of, youth age, college age students who are gambling more, and definitely sports betting is one of those areas where they are getting further into it. And speaking of the college age, is approximately 75% of college students have gambled within the past year, with 18% gambling weekly. 7% of young adults ages 18 to 24 years old reported experiencing a gambling problem in the past year, and the rate is higher among males. Among college students, 16% engaged in risky gambling behaviors, with 6% reporting losses of over $500 in a single day. Online gambling and mobile sports betting are among the strongest predictors of gambling problems for young adults, and that is the convenience of mobile apps and live betting features that increase engagement and risk. Exposure to advertising plays a significant role. We talked about a little bit about that before, but here's some more numbers. 63% of college students recall betting ads being available or present, and 58% saying they were more likely to gamble after seeing them. Gambling behaviors in youth are associated with other risky actions such as substance use and impulsive decision making, and that once again is still due to the developing brain that is going on in this age group. Young gamblers are more likely to experience poor academic performance, strained relationships, and higher rates of anxiety and depression, which is also interesting because we've talked so much about anxiety and depression among our youth, and it's a really good question to also see if there is any gambling involvement or gambling activity going on for those who are reporting issues and concerns with anxiety and depression. But it's often a question that we don't ask. Gambling in youth can lead to financial issues, academic struggles, mental health challenges, and relationship problems. Early exposure to gambling can kind of normalize risk-taking behaviors. Any one of those can be concerning. And part of all that is it's at an age where gambling is not legal at times. We think it's not even accessible. I'm sure there are people who are wondering, like, how are youth and kids gambling? And they, I always say it's not the worry that the youth is walking into a casino and they're not carding the person and you got a 12-year-old at a table putting money down. But, in a way in which we talk about marijuana, it's not like one of the sayings is it's not your grandma's marijuana, or it's not the marijuana from Woodstock days. This is not the gambling of back in the day of just going to a casino. Gambling is changed so much over the years, and that also means the availability and the accessibility for youth has made that more of a risk for exposure. So, you think about then, like, what is, like, think a moment about why take that risk in itself, with those concerns with early exposure to gambling, the numbers that we've seen with youth gambling. When it comes to something like gift giving, it might be a low cost, it might be easy accessibility, it might seem like this is no cost to the individual because they're receiving a gift, and actually they might be able to get more money, they might win, and that's what can be exciting, or the fact that you spent a little bit of money and now they're walking away with more. But more often that increases the risk of these exact statistics and numbers and the impact that it represents. Like I said, anyone that I've worked with who came to me having issues with gambling, and even those who I've diagnosed with a gambling disorder, they all share a history of early exposure to gambling when they were kids. Not necessarily when they were adults later on in their life, but when they were younger and someone got them something as a gift, or they were playing some gambling related activity around the holidays, with family, that this is what, introduced them to gambling in the first place. So, we look at what are some of the reasons why people give gifts. We look at the concerns. There are a lot of good resources too for gambling support. There's the National Council on Problem Gambling, and they have a hotline. That I'm going to say that number is 1-800-522-4700. There's a lot of local chapters of the Councils on Problem Gambling. You can look up your area to see if there is one. There's community support meetings and everything like that. There's a lot of resources for people who may be struggling, because this is also a time where we might see people struggling with gambling. We might see how people may react to gambling related things and gambling around the holidays. So this is a moment too where we might be more prone to be aware that someone may be having an issue with gambling. And the other thing I want to talk about was like just some alternative ideas that you can do. You can give gifts. That's not what this campaign is. It's against giving gifts. It's just to gift responsibly. And to gift responsibly is to not give lottery, gambling related items to youth. It's not worth the risk. That low cost that you see could come at a high cost in their future. And that's one that no one wants to have to deal with or address. So it's in, I don't think if you don't give a lottery ticket or a gambling activity to a youth or a child or a young adult that they're gonna be upset or mad or they're not going to like any of the other gifts you give. I mean, I would say if you may have given that gift in the past and you choose not to this time, and there is some reaction to that or some concerning behavior that the individual displayed as a result, I would say that's a possible early indication that there's a lot more to gambling than what we might think. For someone to be that upset or bothered that they didn't get that this year or for a certain thing might be a good reason to realize they have maybe some stronger connection to a gambling than we may have thought of. And now we see that when we decide to no longer gift that. But there are a lot of alternative gift ideas. There's a lot of creative, age-appropriate gift suggestions. Board games and puzzles. Books and journals, art, supplies, creativity. There's experiences. Being able to take people to places for like passes for museums, events. Zoos. Areas where they can learn and engage and be around others and have that excitement, that fun. Memberships to places. There's a lot of creative things family members can do with, do-it-yourself coupons for different things for like the family. There's a lot of gift cards and stuff that you can give to youth and friendly stores and places that it's not related to gambling. The most important thing, I think, with alternatives is to like emphasize, like thoughtful, non-monetary gifts that like nurture that creativity, learning, family bonding that, I imagine any one of us could sit down and create a list of, I would challenge people to come up with a list of, 50 things you think you could give before you'd run out, that the only thing left you could think of is a lottery ticket or gambling related item. And there's a lot more options than we might think. And the cost of not doing it is not going to have as much of a worry or an impact as we may have thought. There's other activities we can do around the holidays together. There's other gifts that we can give at this time that can still create the thoughtful, fun moments that we want during this time, particularly, and other moments throughout the year with other celebrations and important times. So the ideas are out there. There's several alternatives that youth and kids will enjoy, they'll love, they'll appreciate. It doesn't have to be where gift giving through lottery tickets and gambling related items is the only way to achieve that. So Talking Addiction Recovery has made this commitment to be a part of this Gift Responsibly campaign. And I want to reiterate that this is part of our participation in the Gift Responsibly campaign. We want to bring the commitment to ongoing advocacy for responsible gambling education and prevention, and want to make this call to action that I want to encourage listeners to share this campaign message to then your families and communities that gift giving with lottery tickets and gambling related items is more of a risk to our youth, and that is far beyond what we want to provide them with during this holiday season and other important moments. So a few recapping points to close this out is the risk of gift gambling products to minors is there and it's present. It's evident. We have the statistics behind it. It's important to promote responsible gambling practices. And by doing that, we realize that means to not gift youth and children lottery tickets and other gambling related items. And as a result, there's a lot of other creative alternatives for gift giving. Like I said, create that list of 10, 20, 30 gift ideas and go through them. And I almost guarantee you'll find something that will capture what you hope in your youth when you are giving a gift. So I want to thank listeners for joining the conversation and supporting the campaign. Definitely want to invite some feedback and discussions on the topic of gift giving through like social media, or you can contact us through email. This episode really equips listeners with valuable insights into the Gift Responsibly campaign and actionable steps to protect youth from gambling related harm. By fostering awareness and promoting thoughtful gift giving, we can all contribute to a safer, more informed future for young individuals in our communities. Thanks for listening and hope you learned something.
You've been listening to Talking Addiction and Recovery with Andrew J. Schreier. We're so glad you've joined us and invite you to connect further with the show and these topics at www.andrewjschreier.com. That's AndrewJSCHREIER.com. You can also email us directly at talkingaddictionandrecovery@gmail.com and connect on social media, Instagram at Talking Addiction and Recovery, Facebook Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast, and Twitter at TalkAR_podcast. To stay connected and never miss an episode, be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. Until next time, friends, let's keep talking addiction and recovery.